Hello, everybody. I am Dustin, your neighborhood sommelier for the evening. Welcome in to the next episode of the Duck Vine podcast. Sorry, there was a bit of delay. It finally happened. After all this time, I've avoided COVID, but it hit me and it hit hard. You could probably still hear some of it in my throat. I may sound a little bit different, maybe a little stuffed up, but I wanted to make sure we continued some awesome wine content and brought you an episode that we dearly need to visit. A fun region as we continue our tour through France. We're heading to Alsace. Really interesting region. Some may see it as a region that could be a little bit newer if you just look at it from a broad point of view, but is a region that is just steeped with history. A lot of things have transpired here, but especially more recently, after World Wars, is when Alsace really kind of stepped into its own, especially when you get into French wine laws. So we're going to visit its historical past. We're going to talk about some of the things that make it interesting. How does it really compare with the rest of France? Because it has a totally different story than most regions inside of France or anywhere for that matter. Another region that's very similar that this brings to mind for me is Alto Adige out of Italy. So when we get into it, we'll talk about its transformation through generations, through cultural influences, and just how all of that's really shaped its wine industry and just phenomenal wines that it puts out to this day. So when we first talk about Alsace, it is one of those kind of unique wine regions because it really dedicates itself to one type of wine. In fact, I think it's a unique environment for how many different varietals it has for this one style versus the other. So Alsace wines are almost exclusively white wines. There are a ton for winemakers and growers to choose from when they're looking at the grapes that they're going to plant and grow. You're going to hear this kind of term of Alsace being like this mosaic of wine culture. And when you compare the white side of it versus the red, you can really see that there's countless white options. There's only one red here. Pinot Noir is the only red, but whites, you get into this huge repertoire of choices for winemakers. Big ones, being like your Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Muscat, Pinot Blanc. Loads and loads of wines are centered and focused around these five, but there's also a bunch of other ones that the winemakers here have options at taking in and bringing into their wine. Now, Alsace is a French wine region, but before we kind of jump into like the actual dates and history of it, it is one that has been influenced because of wars and history and rulers going back and forth. So it has a lot of different cultural influences behind it. And it is a French wine region, but because of some of these other influences, it is more un-French-like than any other region that you'll run into, especially when you get into labeling the wines. We talked about all of these grape choices that the makers have, but when you get into like their labels, especially for being in France. You've heard us talk a couple of times. They are very into terroir and where they are at, and this is very important to them making their wines in Alsace, especially with the grapes that they're using. Riesling and Gewürztraminers are grapes that heavily take the influence of their surroundings, the earth, the soil, the rain, everything like that. And it really shapes. You can really taste the terroir in Riesling and Gewürztraminers. But as it has been in all these other controls of cultures and countries, you'll see on their labels, they're a little bit more unique. They go kind of more what we would be familiar with seeing in the United States. You're going to see the maker and you're going to see the grape varietal, and some other little notes here and there that we'll touch on as we dive deeper. But know that when you're seeing an wine from Alsace, the label is going to look different, and that doesn't mean it's cheaper. It'll still say the maker and if it's a Grand Cru or not and all that kind of stuff, but it will say the grape, which, for us, and as we're learning these wines and as we're diving into this, and if I'm not going wine shopping with you, it makes it a little easier to buy some wines because you know exactly what you're getting, unlike when we talk about Bordeaux or Burgundy or Champagne, where you're literally just getting a location or a house or a chateau. And unless you know all the little details of that region or that house, you're not going to know exactly what kind of wine are you getting. Are you getting a Merlot? Are you getting a Pinot Noir? Are you getting a Cab? What are you getting? Here in Alsace, you know what you're getting right off the bat, which is lovely. So now that we've started to look at Alsace, kind of overarching, what did it have to bring to the table? Like, what was some of its influences to begin with? Let's nail down those nitty gritty kind of details. Definitely here a mixture of French and German first and foremost before any others. It is a part of the country that really gets cut off because of the Vosges Mountains, and then is separated from Germany because of the Rhine River. Alsace is about 300 miles due east of Paris. The vineyards run north to south. They go all over the foothills of the Vosges. They started cultivating the areas that are still continued to be used today in about the second century AD. As Alsace continued to grow in fame and recognition, it actually became a very popular place for wine to be made. In the 1400s, there was said to be over 400 different people or houses making wine in this area. And then you start to get into the 15th and 16th century, and Alsace really starts hitting big and becoming an area that is kind of going toe-to-toe with Bordeaux as one of the premier locations of producing high-quality wines in France. So after this time, there was the 30-Year Wars, which when that ended, there was a decree made, a couple different decrees, where it really opened up kind of like the door for multiple cultures to come in. They were offering land and money to people to really bring Alsace back to its former glory before the wars had happened. And so you get a whole lot of more cultures influencing. The Swiss are coming in. This is the first time we really see Germanic influence really coming to town. The Silurians, the Lorrainers, they all were like pouring into Alsace because not only was it great land, but there was also a monetary incentive behind it that really helped not only the wine catch back up, but farmers become successful as well. So how did Alsace start to become under German rule? Some people would automatically jump to World War I or II, but it actually happened in about 1871, at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, is when Germany had control over Alsace. So look it up in the map. Like I said, 300 miles east of Paris. You do that in United States terms, that's not that far of a drive. I know some Europeans would be like, oh, but 1870 to World War One is the first time. It's a long time. That's why it is so heavily influenced and has all of these different cultural influences behind this small little town. I'll post some pictures to our social media like I always do, where you can see some of these towns. These are French towns to this day, but when you see these buildings, these little villages with these little flower boxes and the architecture, my sister's going to shoot me if she's listening to this, because this is her world. But I don't know the architecture and the design and what they call it. But you look at it and you're like, oh, that's a little German home. Like, it just has that fairy tale feel to it that we would associate with like German mountainside homes and houses. So after the Franco-Prussian War, under control of the Germans, 1870, all the way up into World War One. With the Treaty of Versailles, and it is taken from Germany and given back to the French. However, that was World War One. World War Two happens. They come back over and they take it back until the end of World War Two, and then the French officially have it back in their control and have had it back in their control since the end of World War Two. Now, during this little bit of time, in between here, the French were starting to push in Alsace to be recognized part of the AOC, but of course the wars kind of put a hold on that. So it went back through all of its steps that it needed to do to become recognized as a part of the AOC, officially joined the AOC in 1962. We continue to talk about some of the like influential factors that historically Alsace has had. The other things that are little tidbits of information as they've become more and more popular in today's world, in today's market, Alsace was ahead of the curve. So they were the world's first biodynamic vineyard, Domaine Eugene Meyer. In 1969, they also had the second certified biodynamic vineyard, which was Jean-Pierre Frick in 1980. So that's kind of a big jump, 69 to 80, 11 years. But nonetheless, Alsace is responsible for the first two. So if you're looking for some biodynamic wines, check out Alsace. The other thing to really take note in for this region when we talk about cultures or influences, Pfalz is kind of like where Gewürztraminer is known from. Riesling comes out of there. Pfalz is out of Germany, but it is said to be the birthplace of Gewürztraminer. Now, it could kind of be argued, and people will say what they want, but Alsace is definitely the more famed region for Gewürztraminer, where Germany is going to be your more famed region of Rieslings. They both produce phenomenal wines. I'm not saying anything like that. It's just kind of, word of mouth if you were to rate one. But just like everything else, the LeBron James, Michael Jordan argument, you could make cases for both sides. But what's different here in Alsace, for whatever reason, and it's got to go back to terroir because there's no other way to explain it. When you get into Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris, in this area, for whatever reason, terroir, these two grapes in this area have this kind of spicy, like notched up level to them. Gewürztraminer out of Alsace just has screaming acidity. When you get into studying for a sommelier exam, and there's a few wines and grapes in the world that have certain just tells to them, where if you see the color, you get the smell, there's certain flavors. Alsatian Gewürztraminer is one of those. Its acidity is just screaming, unlike anywhere else in the world. So it's unique to this area. It's a wonderful trip. Go get you some dry Gewürztraminer from Alsace. You won't regret it. It goes so well with so many different dishes. A great one for it, Thai, Chinese, that you might not think of, but it's going to go well with seafood as cheeses. It's just phenomenal. It pairs so well with so many different foods. So now that we've talked about some of the grapes, the history, let's talk styles. Let's talk about what they do to make their wines unique here. Top wines are Alsace, are dry, very aromatics, white wines typically. They have this philosophy to really create as natural of a wine as you can. And new oak is almost never used. They don't want any imparted flavor from that. They want the terroir to be tasted. And part of the terroir is its climate. So this is actually one of the driest regions in all of France. You have a great rain shadow there. You're protected as well coming out of Germany. It's just all around just dry. Driest region in France, especially compared to Germany as well. Because of this, blending is almost unheard of here. They believe that the wine making must be like hands off. Top wines are fermented with indigenous yeast, no commercial yeast, and they try to use as many neutral containers as possible. So I mentioned no new oak, but they love stainless steel, cement tanks. If they do use any kind of cask or anything like that, they are using very old casks. Now they, when they get into some of the fermentations processes, you will not see malolactic fermentation. Malolactic fermentation is very popular in Chardonnay. Malolactic, you may kind of be dissecting that word there. Lactic acid, lactate. So that is what gives Chardonnays those really buttery flavors. So none of that's allowed here, because when you do that, it really kind of takes out the acidity of the grape. And here that acidity really amplifies the fruit flavors that are coming out of these Alsatian wines. So when you get into the types of wine, this is where Alsace can kind of get in trouble. So it really has to be cautious of what it's doing. They can make 20 or 30 different styles of wines or types of wine. Regular, reserves, late harvest, cremants. And even when they get into each grape, they'll make multiple reserves using the same grape, just depending on where it came from. So sometimes some makers can get carried away and kind of fall into that jack of all but master of none quote. So they, as time has progressed, they've become more aware of this situation and really kind of gotten ahead of the curve to really focus. Now, besides the predominant style of dry white wines, you can get into Cremant, which is a sparkling wine made traditional, or the same style as champagne. There are some rosés that come out of Alsace, especially if it's a cooler year, and the Pinot Noir in the area, which only accounts for about 11% of the vineyards. Doesn't get to ripen up as well. Then they'll start to throw it in as a rosé. Now, why would it not ripen up as well? We talked about it's due east of Paris, which also makes it one of the most northerly regions in France. It's up there with Champagne, so it can get a little chilly, even though it does not see a lot of rain. That cooler weather will stop it from ripening up. There are two very distinct other styles that come into play when you talk about all these different vineyards, which they're scattered all over the place here. And through all these different vineyards, please note that you do have, in 1975, Grand Crus coming to bat in Alsatian wine culture. There are 51 Grand Crus in Alsace. Now, one thing that some people will say that's a lot, especially for how big this region is. The other thing you'll hear is some of these Grand Crus get a little rap of being too big. As what I mean by that is not that they're so famous, but they have so much vineyards under them, so many acres of land under these Grand Crus that other regions believe they are too large to keep high quality standards in place. So some people kind of argue that, but there are nonetheless 51 Grand Cru vineyards established in 1975. There was an edit made to that in 2007. So if you look up a list to find those 51, because I'm not just going to rattle them all off, make sure you're looking at a list that is newer than 2007. There are two very distinct styles outside of your typical, because they make the sparklings, they make rosés, they make dry, they make sweet, but they have two very unique wines, Vendage Tardive and Selection de Grains Nobles. So Vendage Tardive is a term that applies to wines made from ultra-ripe late harvest grapes that have very high sugar contents, very full flavors. They're almost always fermented completely dry, which gives them very high alcohol content, but very full flavor as well. Now, the Selection de Grains Nobles is more for sweet dessert wines. They are grapes that have been ripened with botrytis. If you remember us talking about that, is a method that when botrytis affects the grape, actually removes the water and just leaves the sugar and the very sweet grape behind. They also start to get into like a very raisinated. They shrink and shrivel. But this generally makes up less than 2% of the region's production, and is such a unique situation for this region that it may only happen once or twice in a decade. So very, very rare, very unique. It's sensational. If you get to try it, it's going to be expensive, but don't turn them down. They have astonishing depth. They're very bright. This is one where they do kind of put down their foot. You talked about there's a bunch of different grapes that they kind of have their choice from, but for here, only 4 grape varieties are allowed to be used to make these, and that's Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, and Muscat. But it's really unique wine. And just know that the Selection are a dessert wine. They're sweet, so that's kind of how I remember it. Selection sweet. A lot of times you'll see it on the label SGN or VT. The Vendange Tardive are not. These are just profoundly concentrated. They have just astronomical layers, density to them. They might have botrytis, but not always. So it's really interesting. And they are typically just drank on their own. They are not paired with food. They're not a dessert wine. They're really on their own. Unlike those selections, the SGNs, where those get so unique and so delicate. Remember, we're talking once or twice a decade. They go in and handpick grape by grape, berry by berry. They're not taking the whole cluster there. So really unique. It's a really special treat. If you ever get to try one, don't shy away. It's going to be so different from anything else that you've really gotten to try in your life. So make sure, for me, that you don't pass up an opportunity at one of those. So while doing my research for this episode, I thought there was a lot of unique kind of cool things going on here. But one funny little tidbit of information before we talk about what's next for the Duck Vine podcast is in Alsace, they are very popular, not only for their architecture, but also because of the stork, especially the white stork. We all know the stork brings the babies, but a lot of tourists go here to see the storks. They were in like this rapid decline until Alsace kind of took an initiative to repopulate the storks, and they have become a key player in that, which is really unique because even when you go back and look at Egyptian hieroglyphs, Greek mythology, even to this day, we look at storks as good luck, fertility, babies. It's really interesting to see. So if you ever get to go to Alsace, make sure you have your camera out, looking up, trying to catch a glimpse of the good old stork. Now, I mentioned earlier, this was an episode coming back from COVID. I do apologize if it seems a little discombobulated or broken up. I'm trying to keep my voice as much as I can. I've had to pause multiple times while recording this just to breathe and get some water and kind of give my throat a rest. So I appreciate you guys understanding. I hope this wasn't a horrible experience for you guys, because I want to always continue to put out great high quality content for you guys to enjoy, but I also didn't want to go too long between episodes without you getting any kind of information or anything from me. So I did talk about it on social media. So if you haven't already, make sure you're following us on Twitter and Instagram, the Duck Vine, on both of those, so you can see what's going on in my world. What am I drinking? What am I studying? What am I eating? Fun things that we're just doing. I've also recently got a promotion at my job, so still doing the wine thing there, but has some more responsibilities on my plate. So excited to see where that takes me and grows with me. So keep me in your thoughts and well wishes for that as well. I couldn't do this without you guys. I really appreciate each and one of you sharing. It's so awesome every time I get to click on the page and see the stats and how we're growing and where you guys are listening from, and just all these new states and countries and listeners are popping up. It's really motivating for me. So thank you for that. Keep spreading the word. Tell your friends. Let people know about it. It's a huge help. There's also on the Buzzsprout link, if you go there, where you can see a way to contribute financially to help us continue not only the production of this, but keep the quality to increase and get better and better to make it more enjoyable for you guys to listen to. I really appreciate each and every single one of you. I know I had some fun, and to continue that fun, I'm going to put out a bonus episode this week. talking about wines that I've been drinking and just giving some reviews of wines I've been drinking for my test. We may have to postpone the test. I did lose some of the smell and some of my tasting abilities. We'll see if it comes back. Right now, to me, everything is super acidic. Everything's just like screaming. It's a weird sensation. I had wine for the first time today in more than like 8 or 9 days. So it was definitely a shock. We'll see how it changes, but we may have to postpone the test. So appreciate you guys listening, cheering for me, rooting for me. I'll owe you that exciting podcast talking about what I've been drinking, so you guys can see, maybe do a little studying on your own and seeing wines from other regions that we haven't talked about yet. Let me know if you do. Let me know which ones you try, and let me know what you guys think of them. As always, I hope you had fun. Hopefully you learned something, but most importantly is we drank some wine.